Suzuki at Columbia University. I attended his lectures for 3 years in Zen Buddhism. And these lectures took place late in the afternoon, between 4 and 6. And the windows were very often open when the weather was good. And directly in line with the LaGuardia airport was this room where Suzuki was speaking. So that when the airplanes passed over, and they did it intermittently, everything he said was drowned out. You couldn't hear a word. He never repeated what he had said, and no one ever asked him to repeat. People were continually going to sleep. And when they woke up, they never asked anyone what had happened. I must say, of course, that I know little about China because we have not been...
We are very badly informed.
We're very badly informed. But what is evident is that there was, some decades ago, this serious problem, and that Mao found a solution so that the people are not divided as they formerly were between the rich and the poor, but they are working together to solve the problems as they see them. Mao, he thought of the peasant in China as being the basis of the society, rather than the factory worker. Each person is able to do all the things that any human being can do, but through circumstances and so forth, we often become specialists rather than whole people. Well, one of the things that Mao has insisted upon for the Chinese is that if there is an army, that everyone is in it. If there is agriculture to do, everyone should be able to do it. If the land is to be changed so that it will not be flooded periodically, everyone in the community goes to work to bring about this change. Even those who are old, even those who are young. From a capitalistic point of view, Mao appears to be a dictator and a slave leader. But from another point of view, he is the bringer together of the family.
I remember that when we were speaking about this the other day, that you saw some correspondence between
that and music.
That and music, and that and your music in particular.
Well, I've made a number of changes in my music as the time has passed. And my first change was one which would be of no interest to Mao whatsoever, I think. Namely, I wished, when I first used chance operations, to make a music in which I would not express my feelings or my ideas, but in which the sounds themselves would change me. They would change my, in particular, my likes and dislikes. I would discover through the use of chance operations done faithfully and conscientiously, I would discover that things that I had thought I didn't like, that I actually liked them. So that rather than becoming a more and more refined musician, I would become more and more open to the various possibilities of sounds. This has actually happened. So that my preference as an individual in terms of musical aesthetic experience is not any of my music and not any of the music of any other composer, but rather the sounds and noises of everyday life.
You said something in...
And here we come, here we come to another connection with Mao. He would have little interest in the complexities of modern music. And were I to go to China, I believe, only be useful to the Chinese as a mushroom hunter. But I might also be useful as a person who could point out the pleasure of environmental sound, which I think is accessible to, well, as we say here in the United States, to the man in the street. And just recently I received a cartoon, a newspaper cartoon, from someone I don't know, showing a person who appeared to be a symphony conductor, but instead of conducting a symphony, he was simply conducting the sounds of the environment. And this person, whom I don't know, made a little note on the cartoon saying, the idea is beginning to get across. Would you, Chris, do it? Mao's solutions appear to many people to be political, but I like to think of them as being utilitarian, like Fuller's. Mao always encouraged criticism of the government on the part of any individual, including children in China, through the use of the big character posters. I think that much of our imagining that China is a slave state comes from the translations of Mao's writings and the big character posters into English, because English is actually a slave language, whereas Chinese language is actually anarchic. Chinese language lacks syntax in the strict sense that English has it, where yes and no are very clearly opposites in English, they are not in Chinese. Certainly anciently in China, perhaps less so now, one could give consideration to a number of characters for a long time, because different meanings would come from the same characters. Whereas in English, if you spend a long time with a single sentence, you tend to go toward one idea rather than toward many. Shall we stop for a moment? It's become clearer and clearer to me that when I express any idea, that other ideas which are seemingly contradictory must also be expressed. Otherwise, we have something that is only a half-truth. And it's very apparent to us now that if we say that it is desirable to be free of the likes and dislikes, that it's also extremely urgent now to be full of likes and dislikes. to just give a single instance, the pollution of our megalopolitan environments with respect to air, water, and earth, we must grow to dislike this situation intensely.
Especially if you get a sanitation strike on top of that. Yeah.
Right.
Like last year.
Right. But there will be transitions from current pollution to hopefully future good air, good water, good earth. And at every point in that transition, and even now when the situation is intolerable, the enjoyment of life on the aesthetic level is constantly open. What are you speaking of?
We were speaking about this recording, weren't we?
Oh, yes, and you asked me what use it had, and I said I didn't think it had any use. Because though people think they can use records as music, what they have to finally understand is that they have to use them as records. And music instructs us, I would say, that the uses of things, if they are meaningful, are creative. Therefore, the only lively thing that will happen with a record is if somehow you use it to make something which it isn't. If you could, for instance, make another piece of music with a record, including a record and other sounds of the environment or other musical instruments, that I would find interesting. And in fact, one of my pieces has that, the Credo in Us. Uses Dvorak. It could have used any other phonograph record or a series of them. But that record itself now, which includes the record, needs, in order to become lively, still more things. But unfortunately, most people who collect records and use them in quite another way.
What would you think will be the use?
They use them as a kind of portable museum.
Yeah.
Or portable concert hall.
Is involved with organization. It's only the simplest and most.
So we have nothing in this country that we can be unashamed of.
But when you picture the situation here in the United States with these big financial and industrial corporations, do you think that a non-violent revolution would be capable of doing away with that?
I think so. When I say I think so, you have to realize it's wishful thinking. But the deep involvement of our educational system in our capitalistic system, that is to say, you go to school not to learn, but in order to get a degree which will permit you to enter into a job, into a business situation, so that the moment you graduate from college, what it means is that you no longer have to learn anything. Whereas, as Illich has pointed out, is that education is of no value unless it continues through life. And this is what Fuller has also pointed out, is that we must not graduate, we must go on studying, that this is the proper life. But nowhere in America do you find these things understood in a way that is good, except among individuals. And this is why not only I, but now many, many more people say that our proper business is revolution.
how would you think you personally could do something to change the situation?
Well, I'm too old to do much of any good now. But all I do is speak and write. And we already know that speaking and writing has no influence.
Has music influence?
Music less. Just play any music you like for two people and then talk to them afterward and see what went on in their heads.
Is this because music lacks semantics?
Right?
Is this because music lacks semantics?
It may be that, and it may be because people don't know how to listen, that they haven't even thought what music could be or what it could do to them. For instance, the average person, I think, going to I don't want to say anything about it, but I think that people can easily go to a concert and come away just as stupid as they were when they went in. What people say about me is that some of them take me quite seriously as a philosopher and say that I'm really a good philosopher and an amateur musician. And then others who find my thinking rather absurd say, well, he's really not a bad composer, but just an amateur philosopher.
Your philosophical ideas have developed in a certain way, and your musical ideas also. Do they have developed
connection?
parallel in parallel to each other?
It's hard for me to say. I think in general, I would like to have things become more open. And it may be that at heart I'm so closed, I don't know. With respect to my thinking, or philosophy and so forth, if, for instance, you oblige me to get out silence and read some passages from it, I find them very good and almost useful for me to read now, therapeutically so, or philosophically so. In other words, I rather admire my former thinking in many ways more than my present thinking. But that may be because in going on, I have tried to become open, particularly to social problems. And as you know now, society as it is changed in China. And this brings about a situation where my thinking is perhaps more confused than it was when I wrote many of the things in silence. Much of what I wrote in silence was the result of studying or the result of explaining work which I had actually done. Yeah. In other words, I either knew what I was saying or I was studying, for instance, with Suzuki, and his thought of Zen Buddhism and so forth was being learned by me. Whereas now my confusion comes from the fact that I don't so much write about my work as I write about just anything that I notice. And I think that many people would agree with me that what can be noticed now is extraordinarily confusing.
If you would regard this album as representing a certain part of American musical life, and also as the particular music of a certain generation of composers, although they are rather different in age, but they came about the world, so to speak, at a particular moment and stayed with it. What would you say are the differences between those composers involved, that is Cage, Brown, yourself, and Maury Feldman? Who at least happened for music, for Europe.
It's
for
nice you ask
Europe
it that way, because people
as one group of composers.
And so and still I think we're thought of as a unit, and at the moment it seems clear that we're very different indeed. Just in the experience of it, it seems to me you could never confuse a Feldman piece with a Cage piece if you just listen, use your ears and listen. Well, the difference is we've just described three different composers, really. The easiest in a way to describe is Feldman, because he's established and followed consistently such a clear line, or such a clear world. He's created a world and has stayed in it and hasn't really changed it very much over the years. It's a music which it's very exquisite and it's very fine, and it's very close to the art world of that period, the abstract expressionist period. Cage always changes, so that's, if you were trying to characterize his work, that's the way you would do it, it seems to me, by the fact that it sets out programmatically and deliberately to move on. And so that you were at opposite poles from the Feldman situation, which preserves and develops a kind of quality of feeling or sentiment, where in the Cage it's not so much feeling as what you could call intellectual rigor that's always at work. There's a kind of hard consistency of mind at work, and not of sound, and not of specific idea, but of the quality of the ideas. And then, of course, with the Cage, he's moved out of the musical world very much. Feldman is now very clear. You can locate him in the musical tradition. Well,
what actually is it that still keeps you together?
When we all started to make our music and join John and meet John and show each other our music and do concerts with our music together, there was a sense that we were the only ones doing music in this general line. And I think, in fact, we were, just for a few years at least. And our pieces were programmed together, and the programs, generally speaking, were brought about by the energies of John. John has always been very insistent on bringing music forward and putting on concerts and getting people to play these things and publicizing it and so on. And he is the one who had the most energy of all of us and seemed to know how to do it best, so that for a few years at least, he, together with David Tudor, really created a kind of scene in which this music came forward. And hence people associated it, associated us with one another. And at the time, I think the whole orientation of the music was, as a whole, so different from anything else that people tended to merge one figure into another rather indiscriminately. And it took a little while, I think, before you could really hear clearly that there were very different tendencies at work. And then the other thing I think is one that I think Morty has expressed very nicely on various occasions, that what John made possible in a way was simply a feeling that what we were doing was all right, was just possible. And there was just a sense of mutual support, if you like. Of a sort of small band, guerrilla band, if you like. I mean, that didn't last very long. It was very attractive, and obviously you can't sustain it for too long. But it certainly was there, I think, at the beginning, and it was very exciting. And I think that's the image that survived over all these years. After, we all went our separate ways.